There are moments in life when we sense something more beneath the surface of our existence. An unspoken truth, a hidden current of power woven through the fabric of our being. We feel it in fleeting glimpses, in quiet moments of clarity, in dreams that linger beyond waking. What if, beyond the material world, there existed a deeper knowledge, one that could unlock the immense potential of the soul? Steiner spoke of such a path. He called it the metamorphosis of the soul, a journey into the essence of who we truly are. He lays the foundation for a profound transformation, revealing how we can awaken to the hidden power within. But this journey is not given. It must be earned. It is not seen, it must be perceived. And it does not come from without, but from within. Steiner does not begin with instructions or rigid formulas. Instead, he unveils a way of perceiving the world, one that does not stop at what the eyes see or the ears hear, but extends beyond the physical senses. He describes a world interwoven with the material realm, a world of forces and energies that shape our consciousness. To unlock the power of the soul, one must first recognize that there is more than the visible, more than the tangible. Spiritual science, as he calls it, is not a doctrine but an invitation, a call to awaken to a deeper reality. He challenges the modern mind, conditioned by rationalism, to see beyond mere intellect and engage with a living, breathing cosmos. This science is not about dismissing logic, but about expanding perception, about learning to see with an inner eye that remains closed to those who live solely by external sight. To the untrained soul, reality appears solid, fixed, and unchangeable. But Steiner reveals that this is an illusion, a veil that conceals the true nature of existence. The physical world, he explains, is but a shadow of a greater reality, a reflection of something deeper. Just as the waves upon the ocean's surface are shaped by unseen currents beneath, our external lives are shaped by forces we do not immediately perceive. And so the first step in unlocking the soul's hidden power is to pierce this veil, to recognize that behind every physical experience there is a spiritual counterpart. This is not to deny the material world, but to understand that it is not the whole of reality. The moment this realization dawns, a shift begins. Perception changes. Life is no longer appearing as a series of isolated events, but as a tapestry woven with meaning, intention, and deeper currents of existence. But realization alone is not enough. Steiner emphasizes that knowledge must be earned through inner discipline, through the refining of one's own consciousness. The soul, like a seed, carries with it the potential for growth, but it must be cultivated. One cannot stumble upon higher awareness by chance. One must seek it with intention, with effort, with an open yet disciplined mind. Steiner speaks of the necessity of self-transformation, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived experience. He urges the seeker to cultivate qualities of stillness, of attention, of reverence for the unseen. The modern mind, restless and scattered, must be trained to perceive the subtler aspects of reality. This is not a passive process. It requires practice, conscious effort to refine perception, to quiet the noise of habitual thought, to open oneself to higher insight. Just as the musician must train their ear to hear harmonies beyond the reach of the untrained listener, so too must the soul be trained to perceive the spiritual dimensions that shape our existence. As one deepens in this practice, something extraordinary begins to happen. Awareness expands. What once seemed mundane reveals hidden significance. The world, once seen through the lens of ordinary perception, becomes infused with a luminous quality. Colors seem richer, moments feel deeper, and life itself takes on a rhythm that had previously gone unnoticed. Steiner describes this as the awakening of inner sight, the ability to perceive the spiritual dimension of life. But this is no mere intellectual exercise. It is an experiential awakening. It is the gradual recognition that the soul is not separate from the greater currents of existence, but deeply woven into them. This is where the true power lies, not in dominating the external world, but in aligning with the deeper forces that shape reality. It is here that the soul finds its strength, not through control, but through attunement. It is a quiet power, a steady presence, an unshakable knowing, and yet Steiner reminds us that this journey is not undertaken alone. The spiritual world is not a void, but a realm inhabited by intelligences greater than our own, guiding forces that whisper to the attentive soul. But these voices are not heard in the noise of daily distraction. They speak in silence, in the moments between thoughts, in the quiet spaces of inner stillness. The seeker, Steiner teaches, must learn to listen, not with the ears, but with the soul. This is where true wisdom is found, not in books or theories, but in direct experience. When one becomes attuned to these silent teachers, the path unfolds with clarity. Decisions that once seemed difficult become obvious. Doubts that once cloud the mind dissipate, and a deep, unshakable trust in the unfolding of life begins to emerge. But trust alone is not enough. Steiner warns that knowledge once attained must be lived. It must be woven into the fabric of daily life, shaping thoughts, actions, and intentions. It is not an escape from the world, but a means of transforming it from within. The soul, having glimpsed its higher nature, cannot retreat into passivity. It must act in alignment with this deeper truth. The discipline Steiner describes is not merely for the sake of intellectual curiosity, but serves a higher purpose. To unlock the soul's hidden power, one must become a vessel for spiritual forces, capable of perceiving and acting in alignment with them. This requires purification, a conscious effort to remove the obstacles that cloud perception. Emotions such as fear, anger, and ego-driven desires must be transformed into higher states of clarity, compassion, and selflessness. Steiner highlights that true knowledge is not given in the same way as conventional learning. It cannot be absorbed passively, nor can it be grasped by those who approach it with skepticism alone. It must be lived, embodied, and experienced. And this requires courage, the courage to step beyond the known and venture into the depths of the self. There is a responsibility that comes with such awakening. As the soul becomes more aware of its place in the greater scheme, a sense of duty emerges, a recognition that knowledge is not for the sake of knowledge alone, but for service, for the elevation of all life. This is why spiritual science is not merely an abstract pursuit, but a path of transformation, one that shapes both the individual and the world around them. The more one immerses in this knowledge, the more the world transforms. Not because the world itself changes, but because our way of seeing does. And when one learns to see with the eyes of the soul, nothing is ever the same again. Steiner's words echo through time, not as a rigid formula, but as an invitation. He does not demand blind belief. He asks only that we look, that we listen, that we awaken to what has always been within us. The power of the soul is not something to be gained, it is something to be remembered. But remembrance is not always gentle. Sometimes it does not come as a quiet whisper or a gradual unfolding, but as a force, something raw, something undeniable. For within the depths of the soul, beneath the wisdom and the light, there is something else. There is a fire that burns within every soul, a force both feared and misunderstood. It rises in moments of conflict, surges in the face of injustice, and consumes when left unchecked. It is anger, and for centuries it has been cast as an enemy of wisdom, a weakness of character, a flaw to be suppressed. But what if this force held a deeper purpose? What if anger was not merely a shadow of human imperfection, but a gateway to something higher? Steiner does not merely caution against rage, nor does he preach blind restraint. Instead, he illuminates anger's hidden power, revealing that through understanding and refining this force, one may unlock a profound secret of the soul. Anger in its raw form is an eruption, an untamed expression of inner unrest. It flares in the heat of opposition, surges against perceived wrongs, and often leaves destruction in its wake. Most see it as a moment of lost control, a lapse in judgment, a force that clouds the mind, and yet Steiner challenges us to look deeper. Anger, he tells us, is not merely an impulse of the lower self. It is not simply a byproduct of frustration or wounded pride. It is an energy, an expression of the soul's intensity, a force that seeks movement, change, and correction. When misunderstood, it lashes out, striking indiscriminately. But when guided, it becomes something more, a source of inner strength, a power capable of reshaping the very essence of one's being. Steiner teaches that the soul, in its journey of transformation, does not discard its forces, it transmutes them. Just as fire can destroy, it can also purify. Anger, when left unexamined, consumes, but when understood, it refines. It is not to be repressed, nor indulged without thought. It is to be mastered, shaped, and redirected towards something greater. Within the depths of anger lies an urgency, an undeniable push toward action. This, Steiner explains, is why anger cannot simply be denied or ignored. To suppress it completely is to deny a vital part of the soul's experience. To unleash it blindly, however, is to let it rule over one's will. The true path lies in neither extreme. He invites us to ask, why does anger arise? What is its purpose? The answer, he tells us, is found not in the outer world but within ourselves. Anger is not merely a reaction to external events, it is a mirror, a reflection of inner disharmony, a sign that something within the soul demands attention. To understand this is to recognize a profound truth. Anger is not the enemy, it is a teacher. And like all great teachers, it offers two paths, one of destruction and one of enlightenment. The choice lies in how we meet it, how we shape it, and how we let it shape us. Steiner reveals the anger in its highest form is not a force that controls, but one that serves. The key is discipline, not suppression, but refinement. The soul must learn to take the raw intensity of anger and channel it into something purposeful. This is not an easy task. It requires presence, awareness, a deepened sensitivity to the inner movements of the self. When anger arises, the untrained soul reacts without thought, but the awakened soul pauses, observes, and guides. Instead of being carried by the storm, it learns to navigate it, to understand its currents, its source, and its destination. Steiner speaks of the necessity of inner stillness, not as an absence of emotion, but as a mastery of it. True stillness does not mean the absence of anger, but the ability to hold it without being consumed. It is the art of seeing anger for what it is, understanding its message, and transforming it into clarity, purpose, and strength. When anger is mastered, it no longer manifests as blind fury. It becomes something else entirely. It sharpens perception, ignites courage, and fuels the will to act. It ceases to be an uncontrolled blaze and instead becomes a guided flame, a force that illuminates rather than destroys. Steiner speaks of those who have walked this path before us, individuals who have taken their own inner fires and forged them into something higher. The reformer who stands against injustice, the seeker who endures hardship yet remains unshaken, the soul that meets adversity not with reckless wrath, but with unwavering determination. This is anger in its highest form, no longer a force of recklessness but of transformation. It is no longer a power that dictates one's fate, but one that aligns with the deeper truth. And so, Steiner reminds us, every force within the human experience has its purpose. Nothing within the soul is wasted, not love, not sorrow, and not even anger. The task is not to reject these forces, but to understand them, to guide them, and to use them as instruments of growth. To master anger is to step into a new realm of inner power. It is to turn what was once an impulse into a tool of the will. It is to recognize that even the fiercest storm within us can be harnessed for something greater. And when this transformation occurs, something extraordinary happens. The world does not change, but our way of being within it does. We no longer react as we once did. We no longer allow ourselves to be ruled by fleeting passions. Instead, we stand firm, not as beings of impulse, but as souls who have discovered the hidden power within their own fire. Steiner's words echo through time, a message to all who seek deeper truth. The forces within you are not obstacles. They are gifts waiting to be understood. And when one learns to see not with the eyes of the body, but with the vision of the soul, the path to transformation becomes clear. The power of the soul is not something distant, not something given by another. It is already here, waiting. just beyond the veil of ordinary perception. The only question that remains is this: will you step forward and claim it? For anger, in its essence, is the stirring of life itself. It is the call to rise, to resist stagnation, to push beyond complacency. It is the same fire that drives the artist to create, the philosopher to question, the warrior to stand firm. It is the same force that urges humanity to evolve, to break free from old limitations, to challenge what no longer serves the higher good. But fire must be contained within the lantern to guide the way. If left unattended, it rages uncontrollably, reducing all in its path to ruin. Steiner calls upon us to become not the fuel of that fire, but its master, to learn its ways, to understand its heat, and to use its light for wisdom rather than destruction. This mastery does not come through denial, nor through indulgence, but through an alchemy of the soul. It is the process of refining the raw forces within, transforming their base nature into something luminous. The anger of the unconscious self is but a flickering ember compared to the controlled fire of the awakened spirit. And so, anger ceases to be something to fear. Instead, it becomes a tool, one that sharpens resolve, fortifies courage, and fuels the soul's journey toward its highest destiny. It is not the end of reason, but the beginning of willpower. Not the loss of control, but the assertion of true mastery over oneself. Steiner leaves us with a final thought. The path to self-discovery is not one of avoidance, but of encounter. To know oneself is to face the forces within, to see them, to understand them, and to shape them with intention. Only then does the soul step into its true power. So as you stand at the crossroads of emotion and wisdom, know this: within you lies an untapped force, neither good nor evil, but waiting to be claimed. The fire of anger is not your burden, it is your potential. The choice of what you make of it is, and always has been, yours. But beyond choice, beyond the shifting tides of emotion, there exists something that does not rise and fall like passion nor flicker like fleeting impulses. It is not swayed by circumstance, nor shaped by the will of the individual. It does not seek approval, nor does it falter under scrutiny. It simply is, absolute, unwavering, beyond opinion or desire. This force is truth. But what is truth? The question echoes through time, whispered by seekers and shouted by skeptics. Some believe it to be an accumulation of knowledge, a mastery of facts that can be wielded like a sword. Others see it as a fragile thing, bending under the weight of perception. Steiner, however, speaks of truth in a different way, neither as a possession nor a belief, but as a force that reshapes the soul itself. Truth, he tells us, is not found in the world. It is not something external, something that can be pointed to or grasped. It lives within. It is the silent knowing that emerges when illusions fall away. It is the light behind all things. The source that calls the soul towards something greater than itself, but to walk this path is not easy. To truly know truth is to undergo transformation, a metamorphosis so profound that one no longer remains the same. This is the mission of truth. We live in a world of shifting images, reflections upon reflections, each claiming to be reality. Beliefs are shaped by what is seen, by what is heard, by what is easiest to accept. And yet, Steiner warns that truth is not found in these appearances. It is hidden behind them, obscured by the very things people hold as certain. Most do not question what they see. The world presents itself in a way that seems whole, unquestionable. A tree is a tree, the sky is the sky, and life follows its course as it always has. But the soul that seeks truth begins to notice something deeper, a dissonance, a sense that what appears to be real is merely the surface of something far greater. Steiner calls this the first awakening. It is the moment that the soul begins to sense the veil, the thin barrier between what is known and what is true. But to pierce this veil requires more than curiosity. It requires the courage to dismantle the illusions that have been mistaken for reality. And this is where the struggle begins. Truth does not come freely. It does not offer itself to those who seek it casually. It demands everything. To walk the path of truth is to unlearn, to dismantle the structures of thought that have long defined existence. It is to recognize that much of what is accepted as knowledge is merely an echo of deeper realities. This is not an easy process. It shakes the foundations of belief, forcing the soul to face the uncomfortable possibility that much of what is once held as true was, in fact, illusion. Many turn back at this point. The weight of uncertainty is too much to bear. It is far easier to remain within the comfort of familiar thought, to accept half-truths, rather than face the abyss of the unknown. But those who continue forward, who allow themselves to be stripped of falsehood, begin to experience something profound. Truth is not a structure built from logic. It is not a theory, nor a conclusion drawn from careful study. It is a state of being. It is something that one becomes. This is the metamorphosis Steiner speaks of, a transformation not of knowledge, but of soul. There are those who do not merely speak truth, but embody it. They move through the world with a presence that cannot be ignored, not because they proclaim wisdom, but because they radiate something beyond words. Steiner describes these individuals as living expressions of truth itself. They have not reached truth by force, nor by intellect alone. They have aligned themselves with it. This is the highest calling of the soul, not to acquire truth, but to be transformed by it. But there is a danger here. Truth is a power, and power can be corrupted. Many who glimpse truth believe they now own it, that they have become its gatekeepers. They wield it as a weapon, using it to elevate themselves above others. This, Steiner warns, is one of the greatest pitfalls on the path. The moment truth becomes a tool for dominance, it is no longer truth at all. To walk this path is to surrender the desire for control. It is to recognize that truth does not belong to any individual. It is not something to be conquered, but something to be served. The deeper one steps into truth, the greater the responsibility to wield it with humility. And yet, humility is one of the hardest lessons. The mind, conditioned by the world, seeks validation. It craves recognition, the proof that it has arrived at some final understanding. But truth does not grant such reassurances. Instead, it dismantles the very structures of ego that longed for them. It humbles, strips away, leaves one standing in the vastness of what remains unknown. This is why truth does not offer comfort. It does not promise an easy life. In many ways, it makes existence more difficult. Those who see truth cannot unsee it. They cannot return to illusion, cannot pretend to believe in the falsehoods that once shaped their world. This often sets them apart. Steiner describes how the pursuit of truth can lead to isolation. The world resists those who question its illusions. To speak truth is often to be met with opposition, even hostility. And yet, the soul that has been touched by truth cannot turn away. It must carry this burden not as something heavy, but as a sacred duty. But how does one live in truth? How does one move through a world built on illusion without being consumed by it? Steiner's answer is clear. By embodying it. By allowing truth to shape thought, speech, and action. The goal is not to force others to see, but to become a living testament to what is real. Those who walk this path do not seek to convert, nor do they demand recognition. They simply are, and in their being, something shifts. The presence of truth unsettles. It challenges the false structures that others cling to, but it also calls. Even those who resist cannot help but feel something stir within them when confronted with genuine truth. It is a quiet force, subtle yet undeniable. This is why truth is not simply about seeing clearly. It is about acting in alignment with what has been seen. Knowledge alone is not enough. One must live it. One must move through the world in a way that reflects the deeper realities that have been revealed. And this is why truth cannot be held still. It is not a fixed point, nor a doctrine that remains unchanged. It is an unfolding, a process that stretches beyond the limits of the mind. The soul that commits to truth must accept this, must surrender to the knowing that there will always be more to see, more to uncover. The deeper one goes, the more illusions fall away, and with each revelation comes the recognition that there is still more beyond. Steiner does not offer simple answers. He does not provide a method that guarantees enlightenment. Instead, he offers something greater, a challenge. Do you dare to see? Do you dare to release illusion? Do you dare to let truth transform you? Most will not. The cost is too high. But for those who accept, there is no turning back. The world will not change. The illusions will remain, woven into the fabric of existence. But for the one who has glimpsed truth, everything is different. The veil has been lifted, the soul has awakened, and in that awakening a new journey begins, one without end, one filled with the ever-deepening light of what has always been, waiting beneath the surface. This is the mission of truth, not to be found, not to be claimed, but to be lived, and for those who step onto this path, nothing will ever be the same again. Yet truth alone is not enough. Knowing is one thing, seeing is another, for there are forces in life that cannot be grasped through intellect alone. Some truths remain beyond reach, not because they are hidden, but because the soul must be prepared to perceive them. There is a quality, a quiet power, that begins this preparation. Not force, not ambition, but something far more subtle. Reverence. Reverence is often misunderstood. Many mistake it for blind devotion, a relic of ancient traditions. Others reduce it to mere politeness, an outward show of respect. But Steiner teaches us that reverence is neither submission nor sentimentality. It is not about lowering oneself before something greater. Rather, it is about expanding one's capacity to perceive what lies beyond the surface of things. To understand this, we must recognize that knowledge exists on multiple levels. The knowledge we acquire in schools, books, and discussions is one kind. It is intellectual, analytical, structured. But there is another kind of knowledge, one that cannot be acquired through mere study. It is the knowledge that unfolds, that reveals itself in the quiet spaces of the soul. This knowledge does not come through effort alone, but through preparation, through the cultivation of a state of being that allows one to receive. And that state of being begins with reverence. Without reverence, the higher faculties of the soul remain dormant, not because they are inaccessible, but because perception itself is clouded by arrogance, by the restless tendency to control rather than to receive. It is in the presence of true reverence that the soul softens, becoming receptive to realities that cannot be dissected, only experienced. We live in a world that values certainty, that seeks to master and explain. Science, technology, and industry have trained the modern mind to approach the world as something to be conquered, something to be manipulated for practical use. The mindset has brought undeniable progress, but it has also left something behind. In our desire to master nature, we have forgotten how to listen to it. In our pursuit of knowledge, we have neglected the wisdom that arises not from control but from connection. The loss of reverence is not merely a philosophical issue. It has tangible consequences. It is why so many people feel disconnected from the world around them, why despite having access to endless information, there remains a deep sense of meaninglessness. It is because information alone does not satisfy the soul. The soul longs not just to know, but to experience, not just to analyze, but to understand, and this understanding cannot be forced. It can only be invited. Steiner tells us that, in the realm of spiritual truth, knowledge is not something to be seized, it is something that reveals itself when the soul is ready. And readiness is not determined by intellect, but by the depth of one's reverence. This principle is found in all great spiritual traditions. The mysteries of life do not unfold before those who demand them, they unfold before those who cultivate the right inner conditions. Consider how the eyes adjust when stepping from a bright room into darkness. If one rushes forward, expecting immediate clarity, all remains obscure. But if one pauses, Allowing the eyes to adjust, the hidden shapes in the darkness begin to emerge. Reverence is this act of pausing. It is the soul's adjustment to a deeper kind of sight, and in that stillness, in that quiet readiness, something shifts. The world does not change, but one's way of seeing it does. This transformation does not require belief in the mystical. It does not demand blind acceptance of doctrine. It requires only one thing: the willingness to acknowledge that the world holds more than we can yet understand. It is the quiet courage to admit that truth is not conquered, but received. We live in an age of relentless analysis. The modern mind is trained to dissect, to categorize, to reduce the mysteries of life into explanations that fit neatly into reason. But this approach, while useful in the material world, is limited when applied to the deeper realities of existence. Steiner tells us that true wisdom is not an accumulation of facts. It is a transformation of perception, and reverence is what initiates this transformation. A person who approaches life without reverence sees only objects, information, and mechanical processes. But when one approaches with reverence, even the most ordinary aspects of life take on new significance. The world is no longer a collection of separate things, it becomes a living whole. A blade of grass is no longer just vegetation, it is an expression of life's unseen forces. A work of art is not merely paint and canvas, it is the trace of something higher. A conversation is not just words, it is an exchange of unseen energies. This is why those who cultivate reverence often speak of a sense of wonder, of the feeling that reality itself is layered with meaning. They have not escaped into fantasy, rather, they have awakened to what was always there, but previously unseen. But in today's world, reverence is rare. Modern education values certainty, speed and control. People are encouraged to question everything, to break things down until nothing sacred remains, and yet in this endless questioning something essential is lost. The soul that lacks reverence cannot truly see, not because it is incapable, but because it is closed, trapped within a mode of perception that dismisses what it cannot measure. This is why so many search for meaning, but remain restless, why so many pursue knowledge, yet feel disconnected from life's deeper rhythms. The problem is not a lack of intelligence, nor a lack of effort. The problem is that they have forgotten how to approach reality. Steiner tells us that spiritual knowledge cannot be forced, it must be invited, and reverence is the invitation. It is the silent agreement between the soul and the unseen forces of existence. I am ready to see, ready to receive. To cultivate reverence is not to adopt a ritual, nor to follow a set of rules. It is to shift one's entire relationship with life. It is to move from skepticism to openness, from dismissal to deep attention. This does not mean abandoning reason, it means allowing reason to be guided by something higher, by an awareness that there is more to reality than what appears at first glance. A person who lives with reverence does not rush through life. They walk with a quiet awareness. They listen, not just to words, but to the spaces between them. They see, not just with their eyes, but with their entire being. And as this shift occurs, something remarkable happens. The soul begins to awaken, not through struggle, but through recognition. Not by acquiring new knowledge, but by seeing old truths with new eyes. This is the essence of true initiation, not a secret ritual, not a hidden society, but a transformation of the self, a reordering of perception, a preparation of the soul. Steiner speaks of a silent law in spiritual development. No great mystery reveals itself to the unprepared, not because it is hidden, but because perception must be refined before higher truths can be grasped. Imagine two individuals standing before a masterpiece. One sees only colours and shapes, the other sees movement, depth, the artist's intention, the spirit that lives within the painting. The difference is not in the painting, it is in the eyes that perceive it. Life itself is this masterpiece. and reverence is what sharpens the eyes to see it fully. The world tells us that power comes from knowledge, from control, from the ability to manipulate reality, but Steiner shows us something deeper. Real power, the kind that transforms, the kind that grants true vision, comes from the ability to receive. And to receive, one must first approach with reverence. This is why reverence is not a command. It is an opportunity, an invitation, a threshold that once crossed leads to a world no longer flat and ordinary, but rich, layered and full of life. And so the question remains, will you continue to grasp at knowledge as if it is something to be taken? Or will you pause long enough, deeply enough, to allow wisdom to reveal itself? For in reverence, the soul awakens, and in awakening, a new way of seeing begins. And when this new sight takes hold, life becomes something more than a series of disconnected events. It becomes an unfolding, an orchestration of meaning waiting to be heard. It has always been waiting for the soul that is ready to see. And yet, seeing is only the beginning. For what we perceive does not merely pass through us, it shapes us. There is a silent force within you. It is not the force of fleeting emotion, nor is it bound by external circumstances. It is something deeper, something far more enduring. It is character. Steiner tells us that human character is not a fixed identity, not a predetermined script written by fate. It is not something we are given at birth, nor is it something that remains unchanged throughout life. Instead, character is a living force, a dynamic presence that we shape through every thought, every choice, every moment of conscious awareness. And it is here, in the forging of character, that the hidden power of the soul begins to reveal itself. Most people believe they are their emotions. They believe that their anger, their joy, their fears, and their desires define them. They live under the assumption that who they are is merely a collection of feelings and reactions, shifting with the tides of experience. But Steiner invites us to see beyond this, to recognize that emotions, while powerful, are not the foundation of our being. Emotions are fleeting. They rise and fall like waves upon the ocean, momentary in their intensity but never permanent. To identify with them completely is to lose oneself in their ebb and flow, never finding solid ground. Nor is intellect the defining force of the self. A person may be sharp, analytical, full of knowledge, and yet remain spiritually stagnant, caught in the endless cycle of thought without ever touching the deeper essence of life. Intelligence alone does not bring wisdom, nor does it cultivate a sense of inner strength. The mind may accumulate facts, but without character, knowledge remains hollow, lacking the power to transform or guide one's life. So what then is the foundation? Character. Character is not simply a moral framework, nor is it a set of rigid rules dictating how one should act. It is the very structure of the soul, the inner architecture upon which all growth is built. And it is through character that we unlock the greater potential of our spiritual existence. A person who has never shaped their character does not truly choose, they react. Anger arises, they lash out. Desire appears, they chase it. Fear whispers, they retreat. Such a person believes they are in control, but in truth, they are merely passengers, being carried along by whatever force is strongest in the moment. They are not masters of their being, they are at the mercy of their impulses. But one who has cultivated character does not merely react, they decide. When anger arises, they do not suppress it, nor do they allow it to dictate their actions. Instead, they witness it, they understand it, and they choose their response. When desire pulls at them, they do not blindly follow, nor do they reject it outright. They see it clearly for what it is, and they determine whether it serves their higher purpose. When fear speaks, they do not surrender to it, nor do they deny its presence. They acknowledge it, but they do not allow it to shape the course of their life. This is mastery, not over others, not over the world, but over oneself. And it is in this mastery that the soul's true power begins to unfold. But how does one begin? How does one take hold of this silent force within and shape it into something strong, something steady, something that does not waver with every passing change? Steiner tells us that it begins with awareness. Most people live in distraction, lost in the endless movement of thought and feeling. They do not truly observe themselves, they simply move from one reaction to the next, unaware of the deeper forces at work within them. But the first step toward shaping character is to see, to watch oneself with clarity, to notice when emotion arises, when impulse takes hold, when the mind begins to wander into patterns of habit. It is only through this act of observation that one can begin to take conscious control. There is a misconception that strength is loud, that power is forceful, that mastery means bending the world to one's will. But Steiner tells us that true strength is something far quieter. It is not the ability to control others, nor is it the desire to dominate circumstances. It is the ability to remain steady, unmoved by the fleeting tides of existence. It is a kind of inner stillness, a quiet presence within the soul that does not waver, no matter what happens in the external world. Circumstances may change, fortunes may rise and fall, praise may come, or condemnation. And yet, the person who has shaped their character remains calm, present, awake. Steiner tells us that life is not something that merely happens to us. We are not at the mercy of fate, nor are we bound by the patterns of our past. We are the creators of our own being, shaping ourselves with every thought, every decision, every moment of conscious awareness. But this is not a single act. It is not something that happens in an instant, nor is it a transformation that occurs overnight. It is a process, a slow, deliberate unfolding. Just as a tree does not grow mighty in a single day, just as a sculptor does not carve a masterpiece in a single stroke, so too is character shaped through time, through patience, through steady, unwavering effort. It is built in the small choices, in the quiet moments when no one is watching, in the discipline of thought and action that seems insignificant, but together forms the entire structure of one's being. To truly shape character is not merely to resist impulse, but to align one's inner world with a greater truth. It is to cultivate virtues, not as empty ideals but as lived realities. Patience, discipline, integrity. These are not abstract concepts, but living forces within us. They are cultivated through practice, through conscious action, through the commitment to becoming something greater than the sum of one's impulses. There are those who believe that spiritual awakening means withdrawal, that to become enlightened is to step away from the struggles of ordinary life, but Steiner tells us otherwise. He tells us that true awakening happens within life itself, not apart from it. It happens in the difficulties, in the challenges, in the moments where impulse rises and we choose something greater. And as character is shaped, as the soul becomes steady, something shifts. The world appears different, not because it has changed, not because one's way of seeing has changed. Where once there was chaos, there is now order. Where once there was struggle, there is now meaning. Where once the soul was tossed by every wave, it now stands firm, awake, unshaken, aware. This is the secret of true transformation, not an escape from life, but a deepened engagement with it. For every challenge, every difficulty, every moment of struggle is an opportunity. And so the question arises, not as a mere reflection but as an invitation. Will you remain at the mercy of passing emotions, shifting impulses, the fleeting tides of circumstance? Or will you begin quietly, steadily to shape the very foundation of your soul's power? This is where awakening begins, not in grand gestures, nor in rare moments of insight, but in the everyday act of choosing. Choosing to see, choosing to understand, choosing to become. With each passing moment, the true master of oneself. This is not merely knowledge, it is practice. And it is in this practice, this daily refinement of being, that the soul's hidden power is finally, fully unlocked. The journey is not easy, the path is not without difficulty, but within each of us there is a force waiting to be awakened. a force that is not swayed by external circumstance, that does not bow to fear or desire, a force that stands unmoved, unshaken, fully alive. Character, and it is in the shaping of this force that we step into the true power of our existence. But there is another force that shapes us, one that does not ask for our permission. It moves through life unnoticed until it demands to be felt. There is a quiet truth that lingers just beyond the noise of everyday life, one that is rarely spoken, rarely seen, but always present. It is the truth of suffering. Not the kind of suffering that is fleeting, nor the kind that is merely physical, but something far deeper. A suffering that seems at times to have no name. We all experience it, whether we acknowledge it or not. A restlessness, a longing, a discomfort that arises not from external circumstances, but from something within us. It is a weight that presses against the soul, a whisper in the silence, a feeling that there is something missing, something just beyond our grasp. And in the face of this suffering, humanity has always sought meaning. Some look outward, blaming the world. They attribute their suffering to circumstances, to fate, to the actions of others. Others look inward, searching for answers in their thoughts, their emotions, their beliefs. They wrestle with the nature of their own minds, trying to untangle the roots of their pain. But there have always been those who take another path, those who, throughout history, have turned to asceticism, the renouncing of the material, the denial of the flesh, the pursuit of something higher through self-imposed suffering. They believe that by stripping away the excess, by breaking the body, they might free the soul, that through deprivation they might find enlightenment. This belief has taken many forms across cultures and religions: fasting, solitude, rigorous discipline, even self-flagellation. The underlying idea remains the same, that suffering purifies, that the destruction of the physical leads to the awakening of the spiritual. But Steiner asks us to look deeper. He does not deny the significance of asceticism, nor does he dismiss the idea that suffering can lead to transformation. But he warns us there is a danger in misunderstanding what true spiritual growth requires. He asks us, what is the nature of suffering? Why does it arise? And most importantly, what is its purpose? For Steiner, the body and the soul are not separate. They do not exist in opposition, as so many have believed. The physical is not the enemy of the spiritual, it is instead the ground upon which the soul walks, the instrument through which the spirit expresses itself. The body is not a prison to escape from, but a vessel to understand, and yet illness exists, pain exists, struggle exists. These things are real, undeniable, unavoidable. But what do they mean? The ascetics believe that by rejecting the body, they can purify the soul, that suffering, when chosen, becomes a pathway to transcendence, that the weakening of the flesh strengthens the spirit. But Steiner reveals something different. He tells us that suffering is not something to be sought, nor is it something to be blindly endured. Instead, it is something to be understood. For every illness, every pain, every moment of discomfort is not merely an obstacle, it is a message, a reflection of something deeper, a manifestation of forces that extend beyond the physical realm. And so, he invites us to listen, to see illness not as a curse, but as a signpost, to recognize suffering not as a punishment, but as a lesson, to understand that within every moment of weakness there is a hidden strength waiting to be discovered. But what does this mean? How does one take suffering and transform it into something greater? How does one shift from resisting pain to embracing the wisdom it offers? Steiner tells us that there are two kinds of suffering: the suffering that is imposed by life, and the suffering that is self-inflicted in the name of spiritual growth. And here he offers a warning. To seek suffering for its own sake, to believe that by starving the body one can feed the soul, is a misunderstanding of the true nature of transformation. For true spiritual power does not arise from destruction, it arises from balance. To reject the body entirely is to reject the very vehicle through which the soul moves. To deny the self, to break it down through force, is not enlightenment. It is an escape, a false ascension built on avoidance rather than understanding, for suffering is not the goal. It is the teacher, and illness in particular holds secrets that most never see. Steiner tells us that illness is not merely a failure of the body, it is a disruption of the soul's harmony, a sign that something within is out of alignment. It is a reflection of past imbalances carried forward from one life to the next, a manifestation of choices, thoughts and experiences that stretch far beyond the present moment. And so, to heal is not merely to treat the body, it is to listen to what the body is revealing about the deeper nature of the soul. For every illness holds within it a lesson, a truth that, if understood, can lead to transformation. But this requires something rare. It requires the ability to see beyond the immediate, to recognize that pain is not an enemy, nor is it something to be eradicated without thought. It is a guide, one that speaks in a language most have forgotten how to hear. Steiner speaks of past lives, of karmic threads that weave through existence, shaping each experience, each hardship, each challenge. He tells us that illness is not random, nor is it meaningless. It is a reflection of something unresolved, something that the soul, in its deeper wisdom, has brought forth to be faced, to be understood, to be healed. And yet, so many seek only to escape it, to numb the pain, to silence the discomfort. They seek distractions, quick solutions, temporary relief, never pausing to ask what their suffering is trying to reveal. But what if, instead, we asked a different question? What if, when faced with suffering, we did not seek to push it away, but to learn from it? What if we did not merely endure illness, but engaged with it, as one would engage with a mentor, a teacher, a guide? For within every moment of weakness, there is an opportunity, not to break the body further, not to reject it in the name of false spiritual purity, but to uncover the hidden forces that shape our existence. This is where true transformation begins, not in the denial of suffering, nor in the blind pursuit of it, but in the deep and conscious engagement with it. To ask, what is this pain teaching me? What is it revealing about the nature of my soul? What is the lesson hidden beneath the surface of discomfort? And this, Steiner tells us, is the true path to unlocking the soul's power. Not through the destruction of the body, but through the integration of body and soul. Not through the mindless rejection of suffering, but through the understanding of its purpose. For suffering, when faced with awareness, ceases to be suffering. It becomes something else entirely. It becomes wisdom. It becomes strength. It becomes transformation, and so we return to the question that has lingered since the beginning. What is the purpose of suffering? The answer is not simple. It is not something that can be given in a single phrase, nor is it something that can be understood with the mind alone. It is something that must be experienced, something that must be engaged with directly. But Steiner gives us a direction, a path forward. He tells us that suffering is not an accident. It is not something to be avoided, nor is it something to be worshipped. It is instead an invitation to look deeper, to understand, to awaken. And for those who accept this invitation, for those who do not turn away, but instead choose to face the truth that suffering reveals, there is something waiting on the other side. Not merely relief, not merely healing, but power. The hidden power of the soul, unlocked not through avoidance, nor through destruction, but through awareness, through the willingness to see, to listen, to learn, and in that moment, suffering ceases to be suffering. It becomes the very force that leads one to freedom, and so the choice remains before us. Do we resist suffering? Do we seek to erase it? Or do we step forward with courage, with understanding, and allow it to shape us into something greater than we ever imagined? For in that transformation, another force begins to stir. It does not call attention to itself, nor does it demand immediate recognition, yet it shapes the way we experience life, the way we interpret the world, and ultimately the way we evolve as human beings. This force is the unfolding of the soul itself. For many, the soul is a concept taken for granted, an invisible presence assumed to exist but rarely examined. We speak of soulfulness, of depth, of inner life, but we seldom ask, what is the soul truly becoming? Steiner urges us to look beyond passive acceptance and instead recognize that the soul is in motion, always developing, always transforming. It is not a fixed entity but a process, a journey, one that requires our active participation if we are to awaken to its full reality. But what does it mean for the soul to develop? Steiner does not present us with an abstract philosophy, but with a living truth, one that is written not in words alone, but in the very structure of existence. The soul, he tells us, does not merely grow by accumulating knowledge or refining emotions. It evolves through the way it interacts with the world. In the early stages of soul life, we live within the world as though it were a vast reflection of ourselves, our perceptions, our experiences, our judgments. Each of these forms a kind of mirror in which we see only what we are prepared to see. The world appears to us not as it is, but as we are. This is not a failing, but a necessary stage of development. Like a child first learning to walk, the soul must first learn to recognize itself in the fabric of existence. It must gather experiences, form impressions, and build a framework through which it can relate to reality. Yet, if the soul remains in this state, it remains asleep. It becomes bound to its own limited perspective, incapable of seeing beyond the surface of things. To move beyond this, Steiner calls us to a different kind of perception, one that does not merely reflect but awakens. True soul development begins when we recognize that the world is not merely a projection of our own consciousness, but something independent, something with its own being, its own inner reality. The moment we cease to impose our own interpretations upon everything we see, a shift occurs. The soul steps beyond its own boundaries and begins to engage with the world in a new way, not as an extension of the self, but as something that exists beyond the self. This awakening is not an intellectual exercise. It is a transformation of perception itself, but such a transformation is not easy. It demands that we relinquish something we hold dear, the certainty of our own view of reality. At first, this may seem like a loss, to question our perceptions, to accept that what we know is incomplete, to admit that we may not yet see things as they truly are. This can feel unsettling, even destabilizing, yet Steiner tells us that this very discomfort is a sign of growth, for the soul does not develop through comfort, but through challenge. It is in moments of deep questioning, in moments when our assumptions are shaken, that something new can emerge, when we are willing to step beyond our own interpretations and see with fresh eyes, to begin to approach a deeper level of truth, one that is not constructed by the mind alone, but revealed by life itself. Steiner describes this as a kind of crossing, a threshold the soul must pass through. It is the moment when we begin to sense that there is more to reality than what we have known, when we feel behind the visible world something deeper is calling to us. This is not merely a shift in perspective, but a fundamental change in our relationship with existence itself. We begin to realize that knowledge is not something external to be collected, but something internal to be uncovered. The world is not an object to be analyzed, but a living presence to be engaged with. To cross this threshold, however, requires more than intellectual curiosity. It requires inner courage. For the moment the soul begins to awake, it must confront itself. It must see not only the world more clearly, but also its own limitations, its own attachments, its own illusions. This is the true challenge of soul development, not simply to acquire knowledge, but to transform the self in the process. As the soul moves beyond its initial stage of reflection, as it learns to perceive beyond itself, something remarkable begins to happen. Where once there was separation, there is now connection. Where once the world appeared as a collection of objects, it now reveals itself as a living whole. Where once knowledge was something to be possessed, it now becomes something to be experienced directly. This is not a loss of individuality, nor is it a surrender to an impersonal existence. Rather, It is an expansion, a deepening of the self that allows it to embrace something greater. The soul, Steiner tells us, does not evolve by rejecting the self, but by transcending its limits. And this is the key, for true development is not a path of negation. It is not a rejection of the mind, nor a denial of the world. It is a path of integration, of learning to see the world not as separate, but as part of our own becoming. It is in this space, where the self no longer stands apart from reality, but within it, that the hidden power of the soul begins to reveal itself. Steiner leaves us with a challenge. Are we willing to go beyond what we think we know? Are we willing to question not only the world, but our own understanding of it? Are we willing to step beyond the comfort of the familiar and into the unknown? Those who dare, the path of soul development is not a path of withdrawal, but of deep engagement. It is a journey that calls us to see more, to feel more, to live more fully, not through the narrow lens of self-interest, but through the expansive vision of a soul that is awakening. And as the soul awakens, the world itself begins to change. For in the end, the greatest transformation is not one of knowledge alone, but of perception. To see not with the eyes of the self, but with the eyes of the soul. To recognize that within us, something vast, something infinite is waiting to be discovered. And in that moment of recognition, the journey truly begins. For once the soul has glimpsed its own unfolding, there is no turning back. Thirst arises, not for material gain or fleeting pleasures, but for deeper understanding, for union with the essence of life itself. This longing propels us forward. We begin to sense that the universe is not merely an external stage upon which life unfolds, but a living presence that speaks to us in every moment, if only we have the ears to hear. Each encounter, each challenge, each revelation becomes a stepping stone on this path. The more we listen, the more we perceive. The more we surrender to this unfolding, the more we align with the rhythm of existence itself. This is the path of the soul, not a destination to be reached, but an eternal becoming. And in this becoming we find not only ourselves, but the entire cosmos reflected within us. For the soul does not evolve in isolation. It unfolds in harmony with all that is, weaving its journey into the great symphony of existence. And so, we are called to listen, to awaken, to step forward with courage, for beyond the limits of what we have known, something vast and wondrous awaits. And in that vastness, a question begins to stir, one that has echoed through the minds of seekers for centuries. There are moments when we pause and wonder what truly lies within us, beneath the surface of our thoughts, beyond the limits of our senses. Is there something deeper waiting to be awakened? Spiritual teachers of the world have given different answers. Some have spoken of an eternal essence, an unshakable core of the self, while others have described an evolving force, a consciousness that must be shaped through experience. Yet, within the depths of their wisdom, a pattern emerges. A pathway for the soul to break free from its illusions and rise toward its highest potential. Steiner invites us to step into this path by examining two towering figures in human spiritual history, Buddha and Christ. He does not ask us to look at them as mere historical figures, nor as distant religious icons, but as forces, living forces within the human soul. These are not just personalities confined to the past, but energies that continue to shape human consciousness. To truly unlock our hidden power, he suggests we must come to understand the soul's journey as it unfolds through these two great spiritual streams. Steiner speaks of two ways the soul can transcend its limitations. One comes through the path illuminated by Buddha, and the other through the force brought into the world by Christ. These two are not opposites, nor are they meant to be compared as if one is greater than the other. Instead, they reveal different aspects of a single great truth. The soul's transformation is a journey from suffering to wisdom, from separation to unity, from illusion to reality. Buddha, Steiner explains, teaches us the first step, the release from the burdens of the world, His doctrine reveals that life, when observed clearly, is marked by suffering. Not just the suffering of pain or loss, but a suffering woven into the very nature of existence. We hunger, we strive, we crave, and yet satisfaction remains fleeting. The soul in its usual state is shackled by attachments to desires, to emotions, to the ever-changing world around us. Buddha's wisdom tells us that the key to transcendence is to free ourselves from these illusions. But what does that truly mean? It is easy to misunderstand detachment as mere indifference, but that is not the essence of Buddha's teaching. True detachment is not a rejection of life, but a recognition of its deeper nature. It is an understanding that nothing in the external world, no possession, no achievement, no relationship, can grant us permanent fulfillment. By looking inward, by quieting the restless storm of craving, the soul finds peace. It rises beyond the turmoil of the world, stepping into the clarity of enlightenment. Yet Steiner does not stop there. He tells us that the Buddha's path, profound as it is, leads only to the threshold, brings the soul to stillness, but it does not yet bring it to its full power. The great transformation, the true unlocking of the soul's deepest force, comes through what he calls the Christ impulse. The Buddha leads the soul to detachment. The Christ impulse leads it toward engagement, toward a profound union with the world. And here Steiner urges us to see beyond religious dogma, beyond the structures of history. Christ, he tells us, is not simply a figure of worship, but an active force, the force of selfless love, of sacrifice, of an all-encompassing power that unites instead of separates. The Christ impulse is not about withdrawal, nor is it about avoiding suffering. It is about stepping fully into life, not as a passive observer, but as an active force of transformation. The soul does not merely free itself from suffering, it learns to transform suffering. It does not rise above the world to escape its burdens, but enters the world fully, bearing those burdens with love. This is a radical shift in human consciousness. Many spiritual paths teach detachment, inner peace, and the transcendence of suffering, but the Christ impulse offers something even greater. It shows that suffering itself can be transformed into something sacred. It is not simply an obstacle to be overcome, but a gateway to the deepest kind of love. This is not the cold peace of detachment, but the living warmth of compassion, of a soul that does not withdraw from life but pours itself into it. And here is where Steiner offers his most profound insight. Unlocking the soul's hidden power is not simply about transcending suffering, nor is it about passively accepting the world as it is. It is about transforming the self in such a way that the world itself is transformed. It is about moving beyond individual enlightenment into a force that radiates outward, a force that brings healing, renewal, and connection. So how does one truly awaken this power? Steiner tells us that this is not an abstract process, nor a passive one. It is an inner metamorphosis, a real lived transformation of consciousness. This transformation is not instant, nor is it something that happens automatically. It requires a deep and conscious effort to awaken something within ourselves that is greater than the ordinary self. Buddha's wisdom teaches us that the soul must see through the illusions of the world. The Christ impulse teaches us that once those illusions have fallen away, something new must take their place. A force must arise within, something greater than the self, something that does not belong to us alone, but to the whole of existence. This force is love, not love in the shallow sense, not mere sentiment or fleeting affection, but the kind of love that stands firm even in suffering, that gives without expecting, that sees through division and reaches for unity. Steiner speaks of this not as a mere ideal, but as the highest function of the human soul. It is what we are meant to become. There is a moment in Steiner's words where everything converges. The Buddha's wisdom and the Christ impulse, the path of detachment and the path of engagement. He speaks of the soul not as something fixed, not as something merely to be purified, but as something dynamic, something capable of becoming more than it is. He tells us that this is the secret hidden within each of us. To awaken is not merely to realize the nature of suffering, nor is it merely to embody love. It is to step into a new way of seeing, where the self is no longer bound by the past, where every moment becomes an opportunity for transformation, where the soul does not seek escape, but instead becomes a vessel for something greater. Steiner tells us that this is the path of true initiation, the path toward the deepest mysteries of existence, and here we find a challenge. This path is not walked by those who simply wish to understand it, it is walked by those who dare to live it. But how do we begin? How do we take the first step toward transformation? It begins with awareness. Awareness that life is more than what we see, that our experiences are more than random occurrences. It begins with a deep questioning. Who am I beyond my thoughts? What is this force within me that yearns for something greater? Then, it requires intention, an intention to move beyond our conditioned reactions, beyond the habitual patterns that keep us tied to suffering. It requires a willingness to let go of the known and step into the unknown. And finally, it demands action. Not grand gestures, not extraordinary feats, but daily acts of awareness and compassion. A moment of stillness in the midst of chaos. A choice to meet another with kindness instead of indifference, a decision to face our fears instead of retreating into comfort. Each of these steps, taken sincerely, brings us closer to unlocking that hidden power within. Each moment of awareness, each act of love, each conscious decision to transform suffering instead of running from it, this is the work of the awakened soul. If you have felt, even for a moment, that stirring within, the sense that there is something more, that the life you live is only the beginning, then know that you are already standing on the threshold of this great transformation. The Buddha's wisdom has shown you that the world's illusions need not hold you. The Christ impulse calls you to step beyond yourself, to give, to create, to become. The soul's hidden power is not something to be acquired, it is something to be revealed. It is revealed when the illusions fall away, when love becomes more than an idea, when the self opens not only to its own light, but to the light of the world itself. Steiner's words invite us not to passively believe, but to actively awaken. And so the question is no longer whether the soul has this power, the question is, will you claim it? The journey has always been yours. The choice has always been yours. Yet, awakening is not merely an internal shift, it is a realization that the world itself is far more than what it seems. There are forces at work in our lives that go unseen, currents that shape the very nature of our existence. We often perceive the material world as fixed, as if the universe is a mere collection of physical bodies, planets, and stars existing outside of us. In his exploration of spiritual science, invites us to look deeper, beyond what the eyes can see and into the soul's connection with the vast cosmos. Steiner turns our attention to something seemingly familiar, the moon. But this is not the moon of poets, nor the cold, distant celestial body measured by astronomers. No. Steiner speaks of the moon as something far more profound, a key to unlocking the hidden power within the human soul. It is here, at the culmination of his teachings, that he weaves together everything that has come before. The moon, he tells us, is not just a body in the sky. It is an echo, a mirror, a vessel of spiritual forces that have shaped humanity from the beginning. To understand the moon in the light of spiritual science is to understand something fundamental about ourselves, about our past, and about the destiny we are yet to fulfill. To unlock the soul's hidden power, one must first come to terms with a reality that is often overlooked. We are not separate from the cosmos. Our inner world and the outer universe are reflections of one another. Steiner reveals that the moon is not simply a passive object orbiting the Earth, but a force, a remnant of an earlier state of being. a memory of the soul's evolution. Long ago, humanity existed in a different form, intimately connected to the spiritual world. Our consciousness was not as it is now, bound by rigid logic and material perception. Instead, we lived in a state of inner vision, of dreamlike wisdom, where the boundaries between the self and the universe were fluid. But as we moved forward in our development, something changed. The Earth, in its process of transformation, separated from the forces that once sustained this primordial connection, and the Moon became a guardian of that lost wisdom. Here is where the path to unlocking our hidden power begins. We must recognize that our modern way of thinking, our reliance on the physical, our belief in a world devoid of spirit, is a limitation. The Moon reminds us that the soul has a history far older than we remember, a history that extends beyond birth and death. To awaken to this truth is to break free from the illusion of separateness, to see that within us lies an ancient force waiting to be reclaimed. Steiner explains that the Moon's influence is not merely physical, but deeply spiritual. It is bound to the rhythms of life, birth, growth, decay, renewal. It governs the tides not just of the seas, but of the soul itself. Have you ever felt the strange pull of nostalgia, the sense that something beyond this life is calling to you? This, Steiner suggests, is the echo of the Moon's wisdom. It is the part of us that remembers a time before we were so bound to the physical, a time when we still carried the knowledge of our spiritual origin. But here lies a challenge. The Moon's influence is twofold. On one hand, it holds the key to a wisdom long forgotten. On the other, it can trap us in a cycle of reflection, preventing us from moving forward. Steiner warns that if we only look back, if we only seek to remember without transforming, we risk becoming lost in echoes of the past. The true unlocking of the soul's hidden power comes not from returning to what was, but from integrating that wisdom into what is yet to be. How then does one achieve this? How does one move beyond mere reflection and into true transformation? Steiner urges us to cultivate a new kind of consciousness, one that unites the clarity of modern thought with the depth of ancient wisdom. The Moon reminds us that knowledge is not static. It is not something to be held in the hands like an object. It is something that must live, something that must be breathed into existence through our own striving. This is the moment when the soul begins its true metamorphosis. To unlock this power, one must learn to see beyond the surface of things. When we gaze at the Moon, we only see its illuminated half. Yet we know the other side exists, hidden from view. This is how the soul must come to understand itself. What we perceive in daily life, the struggles, the joys, the fleeting nature of experience, is only one half of the truth. The other half, the hidden side of existence, is waiting to be revealed to those who seek it. Steiner speaks of inner development not as an escape from the world, but as a deepening of one's engagement with it. The Moon's lesson is this: true wisdom does not come from mere contemplation, nor from blind action, but from the balance between the two. The soul must learn to navigate both light and shadow, to embrace the past without being bound by it, to step forward into the future with vision and clarity. And this is where the greatest secret lies. The Moon, Steiner tells us, is destined to vanish. One day, in the distant evolution of the cosmos, it will no longer orbit the Earth. It will be absorbed, transformed, no longer needed. Why? Because humanity itself is evolving. The forces that once held us back, the memories that kept us tethered to old ways of being, will one day be transcended, and with that, the final awakening of the soul's hidden power will occur. But that future is not something to wait for. It is something to embody now. Every moment of awakening, every step toward deeper understanding, every act of love and wisdom, these are the forces that shape what is to come. To unlock the soul's hidden power is to participate in this grand unfolding. to move beyond the weight of old consciousness and into a new state of being. There is one final challenge that Steiner presents to us. The forces of the past linger. They whisper in our thoughts, tempt us to retreat into the comfort of what we once knew. The moon is both a teacher and a test. It offers wisdom, but it also demands transformation. As we reach the end of this journey through Steiner's insights, we are left with a question. What will you do with this understanding? Will you look at the moon and see only a rock in the sky, or will you recognize it as a symbol of something greater? A reminder that within you lies the power to transform not just yourself, but the very nature of existence? Steiner's words do not merely inform, they call. They challenge us to see the world differently, to step beyond the veil of the ordinary and into the realm of the extraordinary. The soul's hidden power has always been there, waiting, just beyond the surface of things. Now the choice is yours. Will you leave these words behind as a fleeting thought? Or will you take them into yourself, let them shape you, and step forward as something new? The moon is watching, the cosmos is waiting, and the time is now.